Before Europe raised its first castle, before Asia built its first empire, and long before the Americas carved their first symbols into stone, Africa had already laid the foundations of civilization. Here on this vast and ancient continent, humanity didn't just take its first breath. We learned to think, to reason, to heal, to calculate, and to build. From the fertile banks of the Nile to the heart of Nubia and beyond, Africa became the world's first classroom, where knowledge was sacred, science was alive, and wisdom was passed down through both word and craft. It was here that the earliest form of writing was born, where the first doctors studied the mysteries of the body and the spirit, where mathematics was discovered and used to understand the rhythm of nature, where the very idea of architecture first took shape. Every great civilization that followed, Greek, Roman, Persian, and beyond, drank from this deep well of African knowledge. But today, the world rarely remembers where it all began. In this documentary, we journey back to the cradle of civilization, Africa 2, rediscover how humanity's greatest intellectual breakthroughs began right here. And in this first chapter, we start where all knowledge begins, with the power to write. Before the world could record history, Africa had already begun to create it. Around 3400 BCE, in the ancient land of Kemet, what we now call Egypt, the people developed the first true system of writing, monumental, or the words of the gods. This wasn't just decoration or art. It was a structured, logical, and deeply symbolic system designed to preserve knowledge from royal decrees, to agricultural records, from religious texts to medical prescriptions. These writings appeared on temple walls, tombs, and papyrus scrolls, each stroke a bridge between the physical and the divine. The symbols we now call hieroglyphs combined pictures, phonetic sounds, and abstract ideas. Some stood for whole words, others for single syllables. This made the Egyptian script one of the most advanced writing systems the world had ever known, a true fusion of art and intellect. But Egypt wasn't the only cradle of literacy in Africa. To the south, the Nubians and Meroites developed their own writing systems, adapting Egyptian influences and later creating the Meroitic script around 800 BCE. This script represented a leap toward phonetic writing, an early form of alphabet, centuries before similar systems took hold in Europe. And farther west, in what is now southeastern Nigeria, symbols known as NCBD flourished. Used by the ECP and Ejigum societies, NCBD carried legal, social, and even romantic meanings, visual language that connected communities long before colonial contact. It was a living testament that literacy in Africa took many forms, sacred, symbolic, and practical. In ancient Egypt, writing was considered a divine gift. The god Thoth, often depicted with the head of an ibis, was believed to have brought writing to humanity. Through writing, Egyptians believed one could achieve immortality. It's not just in the afterlife, but through memory and record. Pharaohs like Djoser and Ramses II inscribed their legacies in stone, ensuring their names would echo through eternity. Among the oldest surviving examples of writing are the Abydos labels, small ivory tags found in Upper Egypt, dating back over 5,000 years. They recorded the names of kings, inventories, and rituals, the earliest signs of organized administration and government. These discoveries predate or parallel the earliest Sumerian tablets, challenging long-held assumptions about where writing truly began. The Rosetta Stone, discovered millennia later, became the key to unlocking this ancient script, revealing a complex language of poetry, science, and spirituality. It confirmed that Egypt's writings were not mystical drawings, but a sophisticated record of an advanced society that valued documentation, learning, and continuity. More than words carved on walls, writing in Africa was a declaration of humanity's awakening, a symbol that thought could now transcend time. Through writing, Africans preserved their discoveries in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and governance disciplines that would later travel across the Mediterranean to inspire Greece, Rome, and the entire Western world. So, when we trace the origin of civilization, we must remember, it began not with Europe's philosophers or Asia's emperors, but with the African scribes of the Nile, whose reeds and papyrus shaped the written world. In the heart of ancient Africa, long before the birth of Hippocrates or the rise of Greek medicine, healers were already performing complex surgeries, diagnosing diseases, and studying the intricate workings of the human body. The story of medicine, just like writing, begins in Africa, along the life-giving banks of the Nile. Thousands of years ago, ancient Egyptians viewed health and healing as a sacred science, one that united the physical, the spiritual, and the cosmic. To them, disease was not merely a physical ailment, but an imbalance between the body, the spirit, and the divine order known as Mat, the principle of harmony and truth that governed all life. Their physicians, known as Saunu, were not just herbalists or magicians. They were skilled practitioners, trained in diagnosis, anatomy, and even surgery. They studied at medical schools attached to temples, particularly the House of Life, a center for education and healing. Here, medical texts were written on papyrus scrolls, preserving knowledge that would one day influence the entire world. Among these texts, the Edwin Smith Papyrus stands as a remarkable testament to Africa's early mastery of medicine. Dated around 1600 BCE, it is believed to be a copy of a much older document from about 3000 BCE. This papyrus describes 48 surgical cases detailing injuries to the head, neck, shoulders, and chest. It classifies each case as treatable, contestable, or untreatable, showing a clear understanding of diagnosis and prognosis. It even describes brain surgery, mentioning the meninges, cerebrospinal fluid, and the pulsation of the brain knowledge that wouldn't reappear in written medical literature for thousands of years. Another important text, the Ebers Papyrus from around 1550 BCE, contains over 700 medical prescriptions for ailments ranging from digestive problems to skin diseases. It lists ingredients like honey, castor oil, figs, aloe, and willow bark, the last of which contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in modern aspirin. This reveals that Egyptian medicine was not only spiritual but highly empirical, based on careful observation and experimentation. Archaeological evidence further supports these writings. Skeletal remains from ancient Egypt show healed fractures, amputations, and trepanned skulls, clear proof that patients survived complex surgical operations. In some mummies, traces of prosthetic toes and dental fillings have been discovered, a level of medical craftsmanship that has astonished modern scientists. And yet, medicine in Africa was never separated from spirituality. Healing was seen as a divine act, often carried out by priests and priestesses of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of healing. They used rituals, prayers, and medicinal herbs together. Understanding that the mind and spirit played a vital role in physical recovery, a concept modern medicine is only now beginning to rediscover. Egyptian doctors were also among the first to specialize. There were physicians for the eyes, the stomach, the teeth, and even specific internal diseases. This level of specialization reveals an advanced and organized healthcare system, centuries before such divisions of medical labor appeared elsewhere. But Egypt was not alone. Across Africa, medical knowledge flourished in different forms. In Nubia, archaeologists have found evidence of early surgical tools, scalpels, needles, and forceps, crafted from bronze and copper. Farther south and west, traditional African medicine combined plant-based remedies with deep knowledge of anatomy, transmitted orally from healer to apprentice for generations. Many of these herbal treatments, from anti-malarial plants to antibiotics derived from tree bark, have since been validated by modern pharmacology. The influence of African medicine spread far beyond its borders. When Greek scholars like Pythagoras, Plato, and later Hippocrates visited Egypt, they studied at the feet of African priests and physicians. They learned anatomy, pharmacology, the principles of diagnosis knowledge that became the backbone of what Europe would later call classical medicine. Even Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, was building on foundations laid thousands of years earlier by Egyptian healers. To the ancient Africans, medicine was both a science and an art, a pursuit of balance between humanity and nature. They understood that true healing required knowledge, faith, and harmony, principles that continue to guide medicine today. So when we speak of the origins of surgery, pharmacy, and medical ethics, we must look not to Greece or Rome, but to the Nile Valley, where African doctors mapped the human body long before the world was ready to understand it. Thank you for joining us on this journey back to the roots of human knowledge. If you found this chapter enlightening, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe for more chapters on Africa's incredible contributions to civilization. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. Did you know that long before calculators, clocks, or even written numbers existed as we know them, Africa had already unlocked the secret language of the universe? Mathematics. From the very dawn of civilization, the people of ancient Egypt used numbers, geometry, and astronomy not just for trade or building, but to understand their entire world. They saw math not as a dry, abstract science, but as a divine order, the same cosmic harmony that governed the stars, the seasons, and the sacred flow of the great Nile. Our story begins along that very river, Africa's eternal lifeline. Each year its floodwaters would nourish the land, but also erase the boundaries of every farm. To reclaim their fields, calculate taxes, and rebuild their society year after year, the Egyptians developed one of the earliest mathematical systems known to humanity. They didn't just count. They measured, they predicted, they planned. We have proof of this genius in two incredible documents, the Rhind and Moscow papyri. The Rhind papyrus from around 1650 BCE is essentially the world's first math textbook. It's filled with problems in arithmetic, algebra, and geometry, everything from calculating the area of a circle to the volume of a granary. Its opening line even declares it contains the rules for inquiring into nature and for knowing all that exists. For the Egyptians, math was the key to understanding creation itself. The Moscow papyrus is even older. Dating back to 1850 BCE, it contains a mind-blowing calculation, the formula for the volume of a truncated pyramid. This single problem, solved over 4,000 years ago, shatters the myth that geometry was a Greek invention. In reality, Greek geometry was an inheritance knowledge passed from African priests and scribes to Greek scholars who came to study centuries later. Mathematics was woven into the very fabric of ancient Egypt. It was in the precise layout of their cities, the sacred design of their temples, and of course, the monumental pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Giza is an engineering marvel, with each stone laid with breathtaking precision, aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. Modern engineers are still stunned by this accuracy, which was only possible through an advanced grasp of geometry. The pyramid's very proportions even hint at the mathematical constants pi and the golden ratio, suggesting the Egyptians saw divine meaning in this mathematical harmony. But their skills went far beyond geometry. They mastered fractions to divide resources fairly, created tables for multiplication and division, and developed a number system based on powers of 10. Even more astonishing was their use of astronomical mathematics. By studying the stars, the Egyptians created the world's first 365-day solar calendar. They could predict the Nile's annual flood with precision by observing the rising of the star Sirius. This wasn't magic. It was science, born from centuries of meticulous observation and calculation. And this mathematical brilliance wasn't limited to Egypt. In modern-day Sudan, the Nubian civilizations also used geometry in their architecture. Further west, the Ashango bone, discovered near the Congo-Uganda border and dated to over 20,000 years ago, has carved notches arranged in patterns of prime numbers. This tiny artifact suggests that humanity's first grasp of mathematical logic might have been African. Centuries later, famed Greek scholars like Thales, Pythagoras, and Plato traveled to Egypt to learn. It's believed Pythagoras learned his famous theorem not in Greece, but from the temple geometry of Egypt. Plato himself acknowledged that geometry was perfected by the Egyptians long before Greece's golden age. For ancient Africans, math was never separate from art or spirituality. It was the pattern of the cosmos, the architecture of existence. So, when we tell the story of mathematics, we must begin where it truly began, not in Athens, but in Thebes, Memphis, and Nubia. Not in marble academies, but in the stone temples of Africa, where numbers were sacred and science was born. From those numbers came structures that touched the sky, from the soaring pyramids to the monolithic churches of Ethiopia. Africa has always been a continent of builders, engineers, and visionaries who turned earth and stone into poetry. The world's first architects were not Greek or Roman, they were Africans. Over 4,500 years ago, the genius architect Imhotep designed the step pyramid of Saqqara for Pharaoh Djoser. This wasn't just a tomb. It was the first monumental stone building in human history. Imhotep, who was also a priest and physician, embodied the African fusion of science, spirituality, and art. His vision sparked an architectural revolution, culminating in the Great Pyramid of Giza, structure so perfect that its construction still baffles us today. These weren't just buildings. They were spiritual machines designed to connect life and eternity, lined with the stars and the rhythms of the Nile. The great temples of Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel are timeless testaments to this mastery. And this architectural genius flourished across the continent. In Nubia, the kingdom of Kush built more pyramids than Egypt's, smaller and steeper, but with elegant symmetry. In Ethiopia, entire churches like those in Lalibela were carved directly from solid rock, a feat that defies modern explanation. In West Africa, the Benin Walls, a massive network of earthen ramparts, were once considered the largest man-made structure on Earth. And in Mali, the Great Mosque of Djenné, built from sun-baked mud, stands as a masterpiece of sustainable design, perfectly adapted to its climate. What united all these incredible achievements was a deep philosophy. The African mind. Architecture was building for meaning. Every pillar, every alignment, every stone carried spiritual significance, expressing the harmony between humanity and the divine universe. When the Greeks first traveled to Egypt, they were awestruck. They studied in the Egyptian temples, which were centers of science and philosophy, and learned the principles that would later define their own architecture. The famous Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns that adorn Greek temples all trace their origins to the lotus, papyrus, and palm columns of Egyptian design. The very idea of a temple as a home for a god was inherited from Egypt. Through these exchanges, African architectural knowledge flowed northward from Egypt to Greece, from Greece to Rome, and eventually across all of Europe. So when we admire the Parthenon in Athens or the Colosseum in Rome, we are seeing the echoes of African genius, ideas born under the African sun. Civilization, as we know it, did not begin in Europe. It began in Africa, where people first learned to write, to heal, to calculate, and to build. It was the cradle not only of humankind, but of human intelligence, giving birth to the disciplines that would shape our world forever. History, written and rewritten, has often forgotten to give Africa her due, but the stones still speak. The papyri still whisper, and the sands of the Nile still remember. For those who listen, they tell a clear story. The light of knowledge first rose in Africa. From her, it spread to the world. Civilization is not a gift to Africa, it is a gift from Africa to all of humanity. From her soil sprang the first scribes, scientists, and architects, and from her legacy, we all inherit a spirit of innovation and wonder. The story of civilization is the story of Africa, and that story is eternal. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into history as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss our next adventure.